Hello my dear friends, you're on the MilitarySummary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of June of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Zelensky isn't desperate because he doesn't know what to do. Today we got several reports and several statements by different sources that the United States of America is not going to supply and support Kiev anymore. Fighting Russia is now Europeans' problem. America is about to leave the stage. The US is ending military aid to Ukraine. The fight against Russia is now Europeans' problem. So that was stated by the Telegraph this morning, and today we got reports that the United States of America is stopping any supply and support of Kiev and Zelensky regime. According to information we have right now, Zelensky is moving to the G7 meeting where he is going to talk with Donald Trump personally, and most likely he is going to ask him about few things. The first one is to provide Ukraine additional weapon, or at least to sell Ukrainians weapon, because according to information we have, Zelensky has money, Ukraine has money, and he wants to buy weapon, and he wants to buy weapon for the European money. But something tells me that nothing like this is going to happen, because right now the United States of America is sending everything they have in the direction of the Middle East. According to information we have, at least 4 aircraft carriers are moving in the direction of the state of Iran, probably to support Israel in their special operation. Another important thing is that today we got very interesting pictures from the United States of America. We're talking about pictures of this kind. US massively deploys aerial refueling tankers to Europe, Military Watch. The outlet reports an unprecedented transfer of the US tanker aircraft from American military bases towards Europe. And obviously this is happening because the United States of America are going to continue their support of Israel in their operation. I would like to remind you that it is already the 4th day of Israel operation to destroy the military objects and nuclear facilities all over the entire territory of Iran, but the most important problem that Israel doesn't have weapons to destroy the nuclear facilities that are located below the surface. Today we got reports that there is just one country in the world that can do this, and according to information we have, we are talking about the GBU-43 massive bomb that can penetrate the surface, that can penetrate the shelters around these nuclear facilities, and the United States of America is the only country that has them. And today, for example, Zelensky talked about this. He stated that Russia is preparing strikes against Ukrainian nuclear energy. Zelensky following a meeting with the military and security forces, because he understands that the near future is going to be very difficult for Ukraine and for its allies. At the same time, we got lots of very interesting reports from the Russian Federation. Unexpectedly, the United States of America cancels bilateral talks with Russia. The United States has cancelled a scheduled meeting with Russia aimed at resolving tensions in bilateral relations, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. So now this is the message. This is the message that the United States of America sends to Russia, and according to this message we understand that currently there is just one problem for the United States, and we are talking about Iran, and that the United States of America is not going to talk with anybody and not going to accept any demands or any probably threats from any country. They will finish this situation, and they will try to do this as soon as possible. Another important thing is that, according to information we have, the Ukraine and Europe are preparing provocations against Russia. According to information we have, the Ukrainians are going to use their torpedoes of Soviet-Russian manufacture. They have already been handed over by the Ukrainian side to the United Kingdom, and according to the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom is going to use these old Soviet torpedoes to attack some American ship that can lead to complete collapse of relations between the Russian Federation and the United States of America. Another important statement from the Russian side. Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko stated that Russia will demand the destruction of Western-supplied weapons as a condition for ending the conflict. And when talking about the ending of the conflict, today, according to information we have, the Russian Federation transferred another batch of bodies of fallen servicemen of Ukraine. Russia fulfilled the promises made in Istanbul. 6,060 bodies were handed over to Ukrainian side side. In exchange, the Russians received 78 bodies of Russian fallen soldiers. Another important statement is that Russia is also ready to transfer another 2,239 bodies of Ukraine Armed Forces servicemen that died during the special military operation. So as you can see, just 3 weeks ago, the Russians proposed to return 6,000 bodies, and by the 16th of June of 2025, this number has increased by another 2,239 bodies. And obviously, we expect that this is not the final number. We believe, and according to several Western medias, the Russians have more bodies of the Ukrainian soldiers. Some sources reported that the Russians have collected up to 40,000 bodies since the beginning of the special military operation, and the Russians are planning to return every single one of them, which is obviously going to be another huge loss, media loss of Ukraine. Anyway, let's return back to Ukraine, to the line of combat contacts. Today we are waiting, of course, another missile swap, missile exchange between Iran and Israel, as another important thing that both the Israelis and the Iranians probably suggested each other to leave their capitals because both are planning to attack each other. Obviously, the situation is worsening. But when talking about Ukraine, the Russian Federation continued their special military operation and continued their offensive. And let's start. And first, let's talk about Sumy area, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours haven't managed to improve their positions when talking about geolocations or different changes, but we have lots of very interesting articles, statements, and videos from this area. For example, right now, we can see the video that was published by the Ukrainian sources, and in this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians in this area. As you can see in this video, there were several episodes. One of them took place here, another one took place in this area. And this video just confirms the edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Another important video is coming from this huge forest to the south of Novokonstantinovka. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking this forest, trying most likely to reduce the level of defense of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. So we expect that after this strike, the Russians would try to attack in this direction from the settlement of Kondratovka further in the western direction, with the purpose to either outflank the settlement of Novokonstantinovka or to get as close as possible to the next village in this area, huge village, the village of Yastrubina. So something huge is going to happen most likely in this area. As for now, the Russians are completely concentrated on the fight for the village of Yunakivka. Today we got this picture. This is the picture of fire anomalies that were recorded by satellites, and here we can see that around 20 or 15% of the settlement is covered with fire, which means that right exactly in this part of the village is the heaviest clashes ever. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russian forces launched a massive bombing attack on the positions of the Ukraine armed forces in the area of the village of Yunakivka. In total, at least 40 bombs were used by the Russians. So most likely this fire anomaly and this picture is the consequences of Russian attack. And if this information is correct, we should expect that in the very near future, during the next 24 or 48 hours, the village of Yunakivka would be taken by the Russians completely, because we believe that the Russians began their final and major offensive operation in this area. As soon as this village falls, the Russians will be able to continue advancing further in the southwestern direction towards the city of Sumy itself. At the same time, the Ukrainians reported that 60 settlements in Sumy region have been completely evacuated. In general, 60% of residents have already left dangerous areas. So this is the situation in this direction. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kupiansk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And the most important updates are coming from the Liman direction and from the Barova direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions between the villages of Glushkenkova and Novomir. Several tree lines and several fields and positions of the armed forces of Ukraine were taken by the Russians. At the same time, the Russians continue bombing and attacking both villages with FAPs, artillery strikes, and flamethrower systems. And of course, the Russians established complete FPV drone control over this territory. So in this video, we can see several strikes that were carried out by the Russians exactly in this area. And we believe and we expect that the Russians are going to offensive operation to attack this territory as well, trying to improve their positions and to increase the gap between Ukrainian positions and the Russian offensive zone in the direction of the city of Liman. When talking about the city of Liman, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the Russians in the area of Zhelonyaya Dolina. I would like to remind you that several days ago we got reports that the Russians managed to cut and cordon this village and Ukrainian forces in the area of the settlement. And the Ukrainians during the previous days were trying to counterattack the Russians with the purpose to restore control over the roads and to allow the Ukrainians to evacuate themselves from this territory. But the Russians repelled every single attack and Ukrainians suffered losses. Furthermore, several sources reported that today the Russians began another major offensive operation with the purpose to secure the village of Zhelonyaya Dolina completely. So the Russians are about to finish the battle for this territory and to maintain the line along this red line, which will allow the Russians to concentrate themselves before the beginning of another offensive operation in the direction of Shandrigalovo from the northeast. At the same time, the Russians are bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions along the river of Nitrius in the southern part of the village of Karpovka. During the previous 24 hours, we had lots of videos and updates of how exactly the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory, lots of episodes, lots of explosions. So we expect additional progress on the ground in Russian favor using this road to attack. And the main purpose of this attack is to attack the same settlement of Shandrigalovo from the north. If the Russians, and as soon as the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory, we can start talking about the battle for Liman. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Siversk. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. The Russians improved their positions to the east of the settlement of Serebryanka, and the Russians managed to secure the logistic lines between the villages of Verkhnekamenska and the village of Ivanodarivka. So let's discuss in details and let's talk about this step by step. First, let's talk about this area. According to several mappers, the Russians managed to secure the road, small road, local road between Verkhnekamenska and the village of Ivanodarivka. We're talking about this line. This is a very important line because now the Russians managed to improve their logistic, and now the Russians have possibilities to concentrate forces along this entire true line and this entire road with the purpose to advance further in the western directions toward the settlement of Novoselka. So we expect that during the next several days the Russians will make first attempts to attack this village from the south, from the southeast, from the east, and from the northeast. And this is going to be the final village on the Russia's way in the direction of the city of Siversk from the southeast and from the east. In the northeastern direction, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of Serebryanka. During the previous 24 hours or during the previous days, the Russians carry out very interesting offensive operation on the motorcycles. So this is another Russian attack using motor rifle forces, using motorcycles with the purpose, using very probably fast lightning vehicles to move through these fields and this road from the village of Grigorovka in the western directions towards the village of Serebryanka with the purpose to get there as many as possible soldiers and to concentrate themselves in the most eastern part of the village with one purpose, to cut Ukrainian supply lines that go from the settlement of Serebryanka in the southeastern direction towards this small forest, because there are still Ukrainian units in this area. And we have this video. The Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover these positions. It's not like the situation that they managed to discover these positions just yesterday. Obviously, they saw the concentration of Ukrainian forces and this company stronghold in this area, and the Russians realized that they have less chances to establish control over this territory if Ukrainians have supply and support from the settlement of Serebryanka. So that is why the Russians were trying using bikes to answer the eastern part of the village with the purpose to cut the only line, and then with main forces to continue pressure in the area of this stronghold with the purpose to establish complete control over this. But as we understand, Russia's attempts to cross these fields using bikes failed. The Ukrainians managed to repel that attack. But obviously that was not the only, let's say, attempt from the Russian side. We expect that the Russians during the next day will continue. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction, where the Russians managed to improve their positions along the entire line of combat contact, starting from the road N32 and ending with the city of Chasiv itself. When talking about the city of Chasiv, we have made significant changes on the map. As you can see, we have finally colored this gray zone and this contested area in Russian favor, and we did that based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian sources. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians in this area. This video has a lot of episodes, a few of them were geolocated. For example, this is the first place where Ukrainians attack Russian soldiers, and this is the second one. Based on this video, we have adjusted this gap completely. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians are going to attack in the very near future this small forest to the north of the micro district of Shevchenka and to the southwest of the central citadel of the city of Chasiv Yar, with the purpose to maintain the line and to secure this territory, to secure this pocket around this Dniprovsky reservoir. This will allow the Russians to improve their positions and to be able to concentrate additional forces in this direction. Furthermore, we got reports that the Russians began their major offensive operation in the settlements in the direction of the settlements of Bila Gora and Alexandra Shultine. During the previous 24 hours, according to several mappers, the Russians secured the territory in this pocket by taking under control additional strongholds and by crossing the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. At the same time, when talking about Alexandra Shultine, we got this video from this area. And in this video, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking this territory heavily using multiple launch rocket systems and different artillery systems as well. So this entire village was under very heavy fire. At the same time, we got almost the same video a bit further in the southern direction. The Russians established complete fire control and were attacking Ukrainian positions along the railways. So, summarizing everything, we see that the Russians during the previous 24 hours were bombing and attacking this territory heavily with all type calibers they have, which means that this is something like artillery preparation, and we expect that during the next hours, during the next several days, the Russians will try to attack in this area with the purpose to cut these positions and to establish complete control over this territory. Everything to the south or east and to the east of this red line is the primary task for the armed force of the Russian Federation for the next several weeks. When talking about the Kliban-Byksky pocket, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians established complete control over the settlements in this area, and the Russians don't allow Ukrainians to use roads, vehicles for evacuation for supply and support purposes. So as we can see now, the battle of attrition has started in this area. The Ukrainians have no other option but to bring more and more forces in this direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. The Ukrainians have no other option to bring additional vehicles and tanks and probably units with the purpose to hold their lines. The Russians see everything, so that is why the Russians are bombing and attacking the territory around. So this is already something like a cauldron or operational encirclement, when the Russians managed to encircle this territory and to establish complete control with artillery and FPV drones, and now it's just a matter of time when the Ukrainians realize that they have no chances to hold their lines, and right exactly in this moment the Russians will continue their offensive. At the same time, the Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their positions in the western part of Yablunovka. Another motorcycle offensive operation was carried out by the Russians, and most likely, once again, the Russians failed in their attempts. In this video, we can see that Ukrainian drones were patrolling this territory with a significant number of drones, and when they discovered Russian units moving in this area, the Ukrainians attacked them and several motorcycles were destroyed. So most likely, the Russians were planning to use the same tactics with motorcycles and to move as deep as possible along N32 road, and probably with the purpose, let's say, to establish complete control over this territory. If the Russians were able using motorcycles to enter this stronghold area, this could lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense to the strongholds that are located between the villages of Yablunovka and these possible Russian positions. So something like this the Russians were trying to create, but currently we don't know for sure whether the Russians were successful or not. Now let's move further. As for the Pokrovsk direction, starting June, we began receiving more and more updates of Russian strikes in this area. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published this video where we can see how the Russians managed to discover positions of the armed forces of Ukraine and to destroy them with Geran drones. This is a very interesting situation because a year ago the Russians were using Geran drones just for one purpose, to attack deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. And starting this year, starting probably April of 2025, the Russians began using this type of weapon, these drones, also to attack Ukrainian positions along the line of combat contact. The Russians are using Geran drones as if they were using FPV drones, so without any problems and without being afraid of this is very expensive unit, very more expensive just a regular FPV drone. This is another proof that most likely the Russians managed to improve their production of this type of weapon significantly. As for the South Donetsk direction, for Dnipropetrovsk direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation from the settlements of Veselaya, Fedorovka, Kamar. In the northwestern direction, the Russians managed to get as close as possible to the settlements of Zaporozhye and the settlement of Yalta. There are very heavy clashes on these territories. The Ukrainians are trying to hold their lines, but something tells me that right now the Ukrainians are mainly focused on regrouping and evacuating of everything they have. According to several pro-Russian mappers, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions and to take this area of the river of Volcha. And currently, if this information is correct, the Russians are about to establish physical control over the TO428 road and to cut this pocket completely from supply and support. Due to this situation and due to this configuration of the front line, we expect that Ukrainians are going to intensify their evacuation measures from this pocket in the direction of the settlement of Novopavlovka. So the entire front line can collapse in the very near future. When talking about the Zaporozhye direction, the most important updates are coming from the southwestern part of the settlement of Gulay-Polye. I would like to remind you that during the previous days we were talking a lot about the area between the city of Gulay-Polye and the village of Malinovka. The Russians began their offensive operation in this area, and during the previous days of attacks, the Russians managed to enter, according to several sources, the southeastern part of Gulay-Polye, and the Russians managed to enter the southeastern part of Malinovka. As for the current day, the Russians began something in the southwestern part, trying most likely to cut TO814 road and to cut the city of Gulay-Polye from another stronghold area around the settlement of Orekhov. So we expect that in the very near future the Russians will try to improve their positions in the northern direction with the purpose to get as close as possible to this road, with the purpose to cut the road physically or at least to establish complete FPV drone control over this territory. This will allow the Russians to have better positions during their possible offensive in the direction of the city of Gulay-Polye. And that's it for today. MilitarySummary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.